Hi, I'm Maggie,
Hi, I'm Grace, and this is
a very bookish podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to a Very Bookish podcast. Today is episode 78. And as one of my first episodes with an author solo, I have the amazing Kilby Blades, who just has a new release. And I have her on today to talk to you about her history of publishing and also her newest work, which, if you haven't already, definitely go check it out. It came out September 12th. And when I tell you it is amazing, you will relate to it so much, especially as somebody with ADHD who is a list person and loves stationery. You will love this book. So welcome, Kilby. How are you today?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much
Good.
for having me.
Good.
And thank you for noticing. Thank you for noticing the list. The lists are such an important part of the book and of who the characters are is.
I mean, when I first saw the list, that's what first I saw the cover and I was like, oh, there's lists. And I literally was making a list of things I needed to do. And that was one of my top things was download the arc. And I looked at and I was like, this is interesting. This
Right.
is this me? And then she talked about stationery and I was like, what? I was like, your girl loves to buy some good pens and paper and notebooks.
Yes. Yes.
I spend way too much money on that. So Zuri was like, oh, I was so happy when I saw that because I was like, I need to stay on track and focus. And I make so many lists throughout my day that it was such a relatable portion of the character. So for those of our listeners who don't know who you are, do you want to kind of give an introduction to who you are and your publishing history?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Kilby. I've been writing for about 20 years because I got my start in fan fiction, which is a whole other part of my writing life, which is actually longer than my current publishing life. But I've been publishing original fiction since 2017. So my signature, as I say, I write betas in the streets, alphas in the sheets. Because I really like guys. I strongly dislike alpha holes. So
Mhm.
I like a guy who can take charge when he needs to, but I tend to write really I tend to write heroines who sort of are taking charge of their own lives and the
Mhm.
men are there to sort of help them be who they want and need to be. And the alpha side only comes out when they really need it to come out.
Yes, I can, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, I see what you mean. And I love that. What fan fiction did you used to write?
So this will show my age, but the first fandom I ever wrote in was the Dawson's Creek fandom. And that's actually how I started writing romance because I
Mhm.
find that in I'm a big TV and movie junkie, but definitely in television franchises, the writers get the romance wrong. And I think that's why there's a statistic, I can't remember the statistic exactly, but something like more than 80% of fan fiction is romance fan fiction because you end up with these television shows where they either get the romance wrong or they make it like they back burner the subplot and they underestimate how invested the fans are in the romance. And then you get people like me who have to come and either write what they wouldn't put on the screen or have to write the correct romance because they've gotten the romance wrong, which they clearly did in Dawson's Creek because Joey and Pacey belong together. And I felt vindicated. Spoiler alert, at the end of the series, they end up together because I was right all along. So Dawson's Creek was my first fandom. I also wrote a lot of fan fiction in the West Wing for a period of time. I wrote one Divergent fanfic that I really, really love. And I wrote in Twilight, of course.
Wow. I feel like every fan fiction author has to go through their Twilight fan fiction phase. It seems like every time I talk with somebody who writes romance, they're like, yeah, and then I had a Twilight phase. And I'm just like, I feel like that is a classic, that's a rite of passage for some fanfic authors, is you have to go through that Twilight phase initially.
But it was so good. The Twilight fan fiction was so good. I mean, the
Yeah.
weird thing about the Twilight fandom is that there were so many great authors who then published traditionally, and we were so happy they did because they were such great writers. And yay, we get to have them forever, not just with
Mhm.
Twilight. But I would say there were a ton of amazing Twilight fanfics, and the author never went on to publish traditionally. I would say
Mhm.
some of my very favorite ones were never you never heard from that author again, which was just
Mhm.
unbelievable.
Yeah, I feel like it's common on a Wattpad for an author will have this amazing good story, and then there's jokes around where it's the author is like ill and they're like, hey guys, I just got back from the hospital of being in the hospital for 6 months. Here's the next chapter. And I'm like, how? So I big coots to fanfic authors because they are authors. Like there's this like weird thing that people don't think fan fiction authors are authors. I'm like, have y'all seen the things they write? They write better than sometimes the actual story is. So I commend you. Have you been reading fan fiction for right now? But since you're traditionally publishing, are you reading more traditional published?
I read more traditionally published books. I've recently been really, really into memoir. So like I'm not, and I'm a huge audiobook listener, so I'm super into narrators. So right now I'm reading a lot of memoirs who are read by the narrator, and I'm reading the memoirs of a lot of like actors. Like I just read the Viola Davis memoir, and like she is amazing. So listening to her perform her own book was like the content was amazing, and like her as the voice was amazing. I do read some fan fiction. Honestly, I would say at least 50% of my romance author friends read fan fiction, whether they wrote fan fiction or not. So I have my friend Carrie is like my crack dealer, I call her. So I don't actually go through and look for them myself. She sends me her favorites and they are all amazing.
That's good. That's good. I mean, do you still write fan fiction, or is it you're just trying to keep to what publishing not actual books because they're all books, but like publishing them, or do you still continue to write fan fiction?
I don't. I've been tempted. And I definitely I know authors who feel like they've either gotten writer's block in their author career or they've taken a step back. And I do know a ton of authors of original fiction who return to fan fiction intermittently or have taken big breaks and only written fan fiction. It's definitely like still so much a part of the lives of authors I know who have been involved in the fanfic world.
That's amazing. So, what kind of pushed you over that edge to go from writing fan fiction to writing original fiction and publishing?
There was definitely a moment where, when you're in fan fiction, I had a sense because I was writing in such a big fandom, which was Twilight. I had a sense of how popular my stories were because I could see, I was publishing on Twilighted and I was publishing on fanfiction.net, and you could see how many people were reading your books, and I had like hundreds of thousands of reads. So I had a baby, like I got pregnant, had a baby, lost my creative mojo, and then came back. And when I came back, everybody who had been my contemporary in fan fiction, who was sort of like an equal level of popularity as me, as this sort of equal level of readership, all of them had, while I was busy having kids, gone to publish original fiction and had gone on to become like best-selling authors. So I had that confidence where I knew, I felt like I know the caliber of my writing. I know that if they're doing this, I can do this. So that's where I decided to go ahead and do it.
I mean, yeah. Where are you, if you don't mind me asking, are you like a full-time writer at the moment, or is this more of your like part-time like job?
No, I don't write full time. So I have a full-time job on top of writing.
I feel like a lot of authors now, especially with like during COVID-19 and stuff, with everybody having to stay home, I feel like a lot of authors have risen who are like, this is my part-time, like this is what I do on the side, my passion is what, like I've heard a lot of people say. Was it like a goal for it to go further and for you to have like this be like a full thing, full like I'm only an author, or is it more of like a side passion for you?
Yeah, I have at various points stopped working to write full time, and I actually didn't. There were things that I like about it, but there are things that I didn't like about it. So my decision to go back to work was deliberate. I have made shifts in my career. I used to have a sort of like 80-hour week, very high stress, very sort of like high powered corporate job, and I deliberately took a step back to a role that was much easier. I took like a $75,000 a year pay cut to go work in an easier job so that I would have more time to write. So I've definitely shifted that balance. But, even before the pandemic, I was working from home a lot, and I like people. I found it to be fairly isolating. So at some point I decided that, I don't know if I want a full-time work from home only authoring type of job. I don't think like I think I would like to sort of use left brain and right brain as well. So I like working outside of authoring.
Yeah, I definitely get that where it's like, I like working from home, but then I need some social interaction. Even as an introvert, I'm like, I'm getting too lonely here. Like I need to see some sunlight. So I definitely get that. Well,
Yeah.
now you do have a recent release. Looks
Yes.
good on paper. If you don't mind showing our YouTube audience the cover, when I say this cover is amazing, it snuck up on me. I was like, oh, that's cute. And then I look at the details and it looks amazing. Like, oh, I love it so much. And so, can you like explain kind of your process for doing the cover design? Did you get a say in it, or was it more of like it was given to you and you were like, yeah, that looks good? Or was there like a process that you went through to getting this cover?
Yeah, well, the process anytime you're working with a publisher, so my publisher is Entangled, is they have you fill out this big sheet to describe your character so that they can understand what your character looks like. So,
Mhm.
they say, oh, if you have like a photo that if your character was inspired by like a celebrity, or if there's a photo that you have of what your characters look like, send them over so that we understand what your characters look like.
Mhm.
I think that Entangled did an amazing job with the cover. I think they really, really understood the book. They understood sort of like the punniness of the name. So the hero in the book is the heir to a paper fortune,
Yeah.
and they're pen pals.
Yeah.
So they sort of got the whole looks good on paper as the title. But I mean, if you could see the photos that I sent them of the characters, like the illustrations are spot on.
Mhm.
And then actually the way that we ended up with the check boxes, the original cover had the scroll, but then my agent said, what if we put little checks? What if we put little checks next
Mhm.
to looks good on paper? And that was sort of like the final polish, and
Yeah.
everybody loved it. It was like it was the easiest thing. There were no rounds and rounds of going back. It
That's
was just like,
good.
boom, this is it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. When I think of the characters, Zuri and Nico, and then I look at the cover and I'm like, they fit. Like I've sometimes read books where I'm like, okay, I could see them being a little bit different, but I look at the cover and I'm like, it feels like it encompasses the book altogether. And I'm like, I see little things and I'm like, oh, I see what you did there with like the paper airplanes of the
Yeah.
letters being sent back and forth. I was like, wow, like this is this is so cute. And the pink, I'm not much big of a pink person, but I feel like it's the perfect shade. I'm sorry, I'm a very visual person. So like
No, me too.
covers are like my jam. I like will buy a book just solely off the cover and never like know what it's about. But since your
Yeah.
cover was
And
amazing.
you're right about that. They definitely nailed, in addition to it just being a great looking cover, they definitely nailed, like, I agree that what's on the cover is also what's in the book, which
Yeah.
I feel like is not happening a lot. A lot of times you have authors who are sort of trying to follow trends, and they say, oh, this kind of cover is selling, so I'm going to put this kind of cover on my book because it's selling. And then as a reader, you're surprised by what's inside.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that the book and that the cover really matches the insides of the book.
Yeah. And Nico looks so good on the cover too. I was like, I want an Italian man myself. Maybe I'll get a pen pal too. So for our listeners, I did give the warning this today, which our episode went up today, which technically is a week later when this episode goes up. But do you want to kind of explain who the characters are and kind of the basis of this story that I have fallen in love with? Is so good. I give it 5 stars on Goodreads. Like, y'all
Thank
need to read
you.
this book.
Sure. So Zuri works as a customer service rep for a terrible, terrible, cheesy dating app called Hookups with a Z. Like, that's how cheesy it is. And basically, it's her job to get calls every day from people who are like mad about their like hookup dates. And it's really awful. It has left her with zero faith in humanity and with dating. And she lives in Oakland, California, which is close to where I live. And Oakland is pretty like crunchy, and she's very sort of Northern California in that way, and she's looking for somebody substantial. She's looking for, if she's going to be in a relationship with anybody, and she's not necessarily looking for a romantic relationship, but she's just looking for people who are real, because she feels like she's kind of surrounded by fakes and phonies. So she loves paper. She kind of like blows her paycheck at the paper store. She, of course, has a favorite paper store that she goes to, and the staff at the paper store know her. and she has a favorite paper manufacturer. So basically, this paper manufacturer, Emporio, is sponsoring a pen pal program, and she joins the pen pal program, and that's where she meets Alessandro, who is supposed to be her pen pal. However, Alessandro signs up for the program but realizes he doesn't really speak English, and he's sort of like impetuous, and it turns out that he's not going to be able to write the letters because he didn't really think it through. So he gets his brother Nico to be the letter writer. Nico, who's sort of a recluse, and he figures it'll give Nico something to do, and Nico's English is better anyway. And that's how it comes to be that Zuri ends up writing to Nico when in fact she thinks she's writing to Alessandro.
This is one of my like favorite tropes. I think when on the cover it was like he's not who he seems to be or something. It was something along those lines. And I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to be like faking being somebody else? And those are one of my favorite tropes. And I think that is what snuck me in. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the trope that I look for. Cause it's like, I need some lies. I need some tension. I need her to like find out that he's not who he says he is and then groveling. Like, I need this. So I loved that.
Right, and especially in the 21st century, I mean, you would expect that if you're on a dating app, like everybody sort of knows when you're in the digital world that you possibly are not dealing with who you think you're dealing with. So she sort of goes all the way in the other direction to try to find somebody whose identity she can rely on, and of course that also falls through.
Yeah, so obviously because they're pen pals, they send letters back and forth. So how did you deal with, like in other romance books and stuff, you see, at least in the beginning, you see that there's a lot of interactions between the characters because they're seeing each other face to face. How do you create that tension of people who are across the world from each other? And how do you put that on book where you're wanting author, or like, what was your thought process behind that?
Well, I wanted to, like, I had this mantra in my mind, like this whole like bringing sexy back thing, right?
Mhm.
Because back in the olden days, you did not get to see the person who you were interested in all day
Mhm.
long. You know, there are all these, like, if you read historical romance, you know, there are all these rules of propriety, and like you're never alone or together with the person
Mhm.
who you are interested in. So I strongly felt that even though it was a contemporary romance, you know, we're dealing with modern people in the modern day, I felt like there was absolutely a way for them to be building a relationship together that didn't depend on them being together all the time. And of course, that allowed me to sort of show what their lives were like. So I got to show Zuri's terrible, cheesy job and her like awful CEO and her boss who was stealing her ideas. And then on Nico's side, he had some family drama. He and his brother were locking horns about the company they inherited. And they got to get to know each other, and the reader got to understand who they really were
Mhm.
before they ever met each other.
Mhm. Do you think that okay, maybe this is my opinion, but I think that's what makes this book so good is that, oh, sorry, my cat is stepping on my
No,
keyboard.
that's
uh,
okay.
what makes this book so good is I feel like in romance, the characters lose their own personality sometimes because they're in a relationship and it feels more centered. But in this book, I felt like I really got to see both characters individually and kind of their growth individually as people because they started out so far from each other and they're literally writing it. So we get to see their interactions through writing. Was that kind of what you wanted author or readers to feel, or is that just my own personal interpretation?
No, I wanted that too. And I wanted the waiting. Like I used to write people letters all the time. I had a lot of pen pal. Like my mother was a handwritten letter writer. She taught us the art of the handwritten note. In fact, I dedicated the book to my mother. I went to summer camp, I went to summer camp. I was like obsessed with summer camp. I went to summer camp every summer, and my summer camp friends were my people.
Mhm.
And this is before email. Email sort of took around when I was graduating from college, but not when I was in middle school and high school. So I was like pen paling with my camp friends all year long. So I appreciate letters, and it's probably because I have a deep understanding and it's deep firsthand experience of the way that you really can carry on a relationship with somebody through letters. So I wasn't nervous about it personally. I thought for me, the letter writing made everything sweeter. It made the meeting
Mhm.
sweeter, and waiting for the letters was sort of a precious ritual for both of them.
Yeah, I did notice that. I was like, are they going to get the letter today? Every time every time the mention of a mailbox, I was like, letter. they're getting a letter. Oh my gosh. It's like, it makes you so and like anticipated for their letters. So how did you think of this idea to have pen pals? Because we've had like pen pals. I've at least read books of pen pals that are in like the US. Like they stay in it's mostly like pen pals between states and stuff. So what made you decide to have somebody who's all the way from Italy and a girl from San Francisco? Like what was kind of that deciding factor?
So before we got on the call, we were talking a little bit about how both of us are paper people. So
Hmm.
like I'm a paper person.
Yeah.
I am Zuri. Like I go to the stationery store and I buy the stationery and then I want to have somebody to write to. So for
Hmm.
me, it was this extension of myself where it's like, I want to write a character who is obsessed with paper because I know how much money I spend on paper stuff every year. And like I want that character because I am that character and I love that character. So for me, it was just an extension of somebody who just, sort of has their thing they're obsessed with, and that sort of takes over. The other thing she's obsessed with gardening, and like gardening and paper, like are so much of her entire world.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love that they both are gardening and paper people. Like the fact that they were giving tips on gardening through like their little letters was so cute. And I was like, oh, I appreciate this. This is so cute. And the fact that they would update each other and like ask for, I was just like, oh, I, he would if he could. And I just loved that about Nico. But one thing I did, like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is too real, was the customer service calls. And some of, because I worked retail, so I've dealt with customer service. I worked at Barnes and Noble, like during like busy holiday season twice. Like it gets rough out there. Customer service calls is on another level. So how did you just come up with these ideas of these like people? I guess because it is a dating app, so it's like, of course, people are gonna call to try to get other people's information. But the like some of them, I was like, where did she get this from? I think it was like his dick pic lighter or something like that. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh.
So I do have friends who are on the dating scene. So I've been in a relationship for 20 years, so I haven't dated. I never dated really in the time of apps, not really. So I have friends who tell me stories, which was part of where that came from. But also I have also worked with the general public. So I waited tables and tended bar for a long
Mhm.
time. And I worked in a company that was also very sort of like that had a role where I was public facing. And I think you're right. Like you said, yeah, I've worked retail, of course. Anytime you have a job where you work with the general public, there's something that you start to understand about like people and
Mhm.
like customers and expectations. So I think that probably many people who have worked in retail have experienced customers like the ones who Zuri experiences.
Yeah, because some of them I was like, when you tell a person no and they keep pushing you, and I'm like, I sometimes just sort of like hang up on the phone. Like I've had people like call me and they're like yelling at me, and I'm like, sir, you don't need to yell at me. And I've gotten in trouble for telling people that, like, you don't need to yell at me. Like, I'm just sitting here calmly, like, I can't order you this book. I can't. I just have no
Right.
capability to do that. And they're like, to me, to your manager. And I'm like, okay, here you go. Like,
Right.
it's,
People are mad at you because they're mad. They're
yeah.
mad. They're mad at the company or they're mad in general, but then they're
Hmm.
like mad at you, right? So
Yeah.
that happens a lot to Zuri, where there was a woman, not just his dick pic lad comment. There was a woman who was mad that her date didn't have any hair. That was one of the calls. That her
That
date
one,
didn't have any hair.
so
His
confused. I was
picture
like,
in his hair, in his picture he had eyebrows, but he did not have any eyebrows. When I went on the date with him, and I think there needs to be a note on his account, right? Like,
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, that was definitely when I like was reading that, I was like, this has to have happened. I'm like, this cannot be fake because I'm pretty sure, like, I guarantee you this has happened before. And I just was laughing at all those different, like, and the wall idea, I think was so on character for her to have
so
that.
that is real. That the wall is real. Not from a customer service situation. I used to have a job actually when I was in school. I was on the student admissions committee, and I was the dean of the student admissions committee. So that meant that students got to read some portion of applications that came in, and we had a room where and a bunch of Sharpies. And anytime you read something funny on an application, you would write it on the wall. So like, you would go in
Uh,
and
yeah.
I remember the best one I ever read was somebody wrote, so and so was an asset to his company, as was his buxom wife. Somebody actually wrote that in a recommendation. In a recommendation, it was very backhanded, right? But people would do all kinds of things. I mean, one year there was a question that was like, if you could meet anybody, who would it be? And like dozens of people said Yoda. So there was just like something on the wall that year that said Yoda, and then there were just tick marks next to the number of people who said Yoda, right? So that whole thing with the wall that's like the let's write down the funny things, that's something that I actually experienced myself.
That I was thinking about that. I was like, this is such, I mean, when I saw the wall, I'm like, Game of Thrones wall. No, it's not that. And then I'm like, oh, this is like way funnier than that. Like, I was like, when I was reading, I was like, this is such a unique idea. Like, this has to, like, I don't know how she, oh, sorry, my parents are calling me. I was like, this has to be like such a unique idea. And the fact that that's actually true, I think makes it 1,000 times more funnier when you read the book of like, oh, this has happened before. And it'll probably keep happening again and again.
Many things you read in books are true.
That's actually kind of scary. If I'm going to be honest, that's kind of scary. So I know we do have to kind of wrap it up, but is there anything that you want to tell our listeners about the book that they should keep in mind?
Well, so you asked what my inspiration was for writing the book, and I said part of it is, I am Zuri. So the other part of my identity that I really brought into this book is I'm a huge traveler. So I used to be a food, wine, and travel writer. So I have lived that experience of, going to another country and either going and living there for a while or going on an extended vacation there, or going there for a while, and then all of a sudden I decided that I'm going to live there. So what I loved about writing this book is I got to bring in my travel writing background. All of the places that I write about, I've been. So this one takes place in a region of Italy that I've been to. I wrote another one called It Takes a Villa that takes place in a region of Italy I've been to. So the experience, and this book, she's in Paris, she's in Switzerland, she's in Germany. And a lot of those experiences and those feelings and that reliving is also drawn from my life. And I love bringing that experience of travel into my books.
If you could sum up this book in one sentence, what would like your like round up like overall view of what this book is, to kind of like an elevator pitch to somebody who looks at this book in the store and is like, should I get it or should I not? What would you say to that person?
Wow. So this is going to sound strange because it doesn't sound like this is what it is at all. But I think it's a little bit of a Wizard of Oz, where you go on this adventure and you sort of realize that where you want to end up after the adventure is your home. Yet he's her home, right? And so it's like, she starts out with this intimacy with him, and then things happen, but then she sort of like finds her way back to him. I feel like it's this big adventure where at the end of the adventure you've really, really grown as a person, but that you end up exactly in the place where you're supposed to be.
That is like a perfect summary. I was kind of confused with the Wizard of Oz, and I was like,
I know it seems random.
Perfect.
There's no houses falling on witches. There's no like yellow brick road. There's no poppy fields. None of that.
Yes, but it's amazing. So definitely you, our listeners, should go ahead and get this book. It's actually available on Kindle Unlimited, which when I checked on Amazon, I was like, it's Kindle Unlimited. What?
I know, and that was a surprise to me too. I didn't know that it was going to go into KU, but sometimes books are only available in KU and they're not available widely. This book is available everywhere, including in KU. So that's really exciting. This is actually the first book that I've had that happen to. So I'm really excited about that.
Yes, so definitely go check it out. And thank you, Kilby, for coming on. And thank you to all of our amazing listeners who have listened to this episode. I'll have all of her links down below, and I'll have a link to the Kindle Unlimited copy. So you should definitely go download it right now. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. And thank you, Kilby. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you.